So I just did a story about confession booths and a bill trying to get priests to have to report if they learn about child abuse through the act of confession. Well, that story was in Montana. A similar thing is happening in Washington state. And I'm showing you the relevant part of this bill in Washington state. And this is, I'll remove myself here so you could see this. The only interesting thing happening here is it talks about how, quote, coaches, anyone who is in contact with children, anyone in supervisory authority has to report abuse if a child has suffered abuse or neglect, or you have reasonable cause to believe that, you got to report it to an authority figure. And then look at the end of this current law right now. The current law, not the underlined part, the current law says no one shall be required to report under this section when he or she obtains the information solely as a result of a privileged communication. So right now, the law says if you learn about this through something that's already a secret, I'm just spitballing here. Maybe you're a lawyer and you learn about this because your client told you something in confidence. Maybe that would be an exemption to the law. But it says if you learned about it through things that are already protected, you don't have to report it. What this new bill in Washington would do is say, guess what? That rule does not apply to members of the clergy. So this is the way they are saying, if a priest learns about abuse through the act of confession, you don't get to do this loophole. You don't get an exemption. You are a mandated reporter. You have to tell an authority figure about this. So it's slightly different than the version we just saw in Montana, but it has the same end result. This is Senate Bill 5375, and basically all it would do is add members of the clergy to the list of mandated reporters, and that would be a good thing. And what's interesting about what's happening in Washington state is that this is the third time in a couple of years they've tried to pass this bill. The problem is every time they try to pass the bill, the Catholic Church complains about it. Republicans sometimes complain about it. And they have to say, okay, you want to protect kids, but you got to include a loophole that protects priests during the act of confession. Like, that exemption has to be in every version of this bill. And so what's different this time around is that State Senator Noel Frame, she said the last time she tried to file this bill, she had to include that compromise. She had to include the confession compromise. But after she did it the last time, the state's attorney general announced that 3 separate dioceses in the state were being investigated for sex abuse by clergy members. And so many people were so mad about this, including politicians, that they said, why are we making an exemption for priests who learn about abuse through the act of confession? Get rid of the loophole. And it's not just Democrats who did that. People from both parties were so upset about the abuse that they said, screw the compromise, no compromise. But after they got rid of it, people started complaining that there was no exemption, and the bill just ended up sitting there and going nowhere, unfortunately. They ran out of time to pass it. So now Noel Frame is attempting to pass this mandated reporter bill again. And the big thing about it is there is no compromise in this bill. There is no, if you learn about it in confession, it's okay. Nope. As you saw, I showed it to you. Clergy members are not exempt anymore. That's what her bill does. And I want to show you a section of the testimony she gave during the committee hearing, because I found it really touching why this is so important to her. So let me play this for you.
I will say that the bill fell apart last year after the revelation that the Catholic, 3 separate archdioceses of the Catholic Church were being investigated. Which was not able to be corroborated until after legislative session last year, but that became public. And quite frankly, it made it hard for me at a personal level to stomach any argument about religious freedom being more important than preventing the abuse, including the sexual abuse of children. Because everybody that's been following this bill knows that this one is personal for me. as a survivor of sexual abuse myself, and abuse had only stopped when I told a mandated reporter, which was a teacher. So I have tried really hard over the last couple of years to find a balance and to strike a careful compromise. And I'm just here to say, for those who I've tried to work with, I'm really sorry that I don't feel like I can make a compromise for you anymore. And I stand by the bill with no exemption.
When was the last time you saw that kind of courage from a lawmaker? I don't feel like I can make a compromise for you anymore. Like, yes, you can't compromise with people who would eagerly throw abuse victims under the bus if their mythology demanded it. And furthermore, there is no way to exempt confession from mandated reporting when confession itself is the problem here, because it gives sexual predators a way to shed some of their guilt without interfering with whatever it is they're doing to kids. They don't deserve that kind of safe space to spill their guts without penalty. So at this committee hearing where they were just discussing the bill, there were a lot of people testifying. They could go either way. They could testify for it or against it. Most of the testimony was for passing this bill because, yeah, priests should have to report this stuff. One person, Sharon Hewling with the Clergy Accountability Coalition, she pointed out the irony of how the church will excommunicate a good priest if he reports child sexual abuse that he learned about in confession. But if there's a bad priest who commits that crime, that priest doesn't get excommunicated. And isn't that weird? She also reiterated in her testimony that, listen, confession's going to be protected for everybody else. The only people who have to worry about the privacy of their confession are people going after kids. So screw them. Now, you might be wondering, who the hell would testify against this bill? Who is saying, yeah, kids are getting abused, but you know what we should do about that? Nothing. It's a member of the Catholic Church. Let me show you a video. This is Bishop Frank Schuster of the Archdiocese of Seattle. And he says early in his remarks, of course child abuse is bad. Of course the Catholic Church wants to protect the kids. But you guys, have you ever heard of someone named Jesus? This is basically what his argument boils down to. Let me play his clip.
Every priest is trained to be a mandatory reporter. Every employee and volunteer are trained to be mandatory reporters, except the rite of penance. Why this one exception? The rite of penance, as the term rite indicates, is a liturgy. It's an act of worship. It's prayer. For us, the seal of confession is essential to the rite because a penitent has the right to confess their sins without worrying their sins will become public. The penalty for breaking that seal is excommunication. Something even as a bishop, I can't, have any power over. And even the Pope would say he doesn't have power because this is a sacrament that comes from Christ. You see, this is coming from the Lord. This sacrament. And so it's impossible for a priest to comply this bill in this one instance. However, preserving the seal of confession does not prevent a priest from promoting justice and safety. In fact, confession is an opportunity to tell offenders to turn themselves in as a matter of restitution, talking to young people who are experiencing abuse to help identify a safe adult who is a mandatory reporter. So to be able to direct in that direction. We believe in the spirit of the bill. We believe in the spirit of the bill and be honored to be partners in rewording it so it does not violate our constitutional freedom of religion.
He believes in the spirit of the bill, just not the thing that's actually going to make it worthwhile. Did you hear the crazy thing he said? If you're a priest and you're in the confession booth, you can totally stop the abuse, not by being a mandated reporter. You can just tell offenders to turn themselves in. Yeah, it's that easy. I'm sure that's what everything he said there just deserves to be ridiculed and condemned. Because as I said last time, in no rational world is getting excommunicated more damning than letting a child continue to suffer abuse. And if you would rather protect priests than kids, your organization should just admit, we don't give a damn about children. All right? That's like telling offenders to turn themselves in. That's like Pete Hegseth saying, you guys, if you make me Secretary of Defense, I promise I'll stop binge drinking in the mornings. Like, no one should believe you. We know who you are. It's not suddenly going to fix itself. I want to show you one more clip. This one's a good one. This is from my friend and someone who occasionally watches this live stream as well, Christiana De Leon. She is a board member of the Association of Secular Elected Officials, and she spoke out in favor of this bill as well. And I'm going to let her speak for herself. She only had like 2 minutes at the very end of the session, but she managed to squeeze a lot of good stuff in. So I really appreciated it. I hope you do too. Let me show you this.
This is not an anti-religion bill. This is about solidarity with survivors, including those who are still practicing their faiths and want to do so in a safe way, and that they can trust that the people who are running their services will be able to say that these people are going to be supporting my child or any other vulnerable person when they are in a position where they really need that help. What I've heard today was a lot of things about rights, R-I-T-E-S, and not rights as in human rights or the First Amendment rights of the people who are in these churches who deserve to be kept safe. I will want to remind everybody that we did have a bill that was really specially catered for the Catholic lobby group last year, to Senator Frame's point. And thank you to the senators in this room for sponsoring this bill. I am for it. We had a very narrowly tailored version that was essentially gerrymandered to provide religious privilege to one entity. It was the survivors of other religious entities and survivors from within the Catholic Church that said this did not go far enough. Washington State truly can be a leader in saying that no matter where abuse happens, you can be protected. I'll just close that I used to be a former mandated reporter, and one of the very first things that we're always taught is that it's important to report abuse. What I heard just recently was that somehow you shouldn't be reporting abuse because it might, scare away a victim. And that is one of the very perennial, evergreen things that anybody who's ever been taught mandated reporter knows, is that they have to be able to report and have that conversation with the impacted person. So thank you for your time. Please pass the bill.
Love it. And I hope all of you who have these things going on in your state, I hope you will sign up to deliver those comments, because they're always looking for people testifying for or against a bill. And Christiana's right. It's long past time the rights of individuals come before the rights of religious leaders. R-I-T-E-S at the second one there. If this bill passes, I just want to share this with you. This is from the Seattle Times. Mandated reporters in the state are required to report suspicions of abuse within 48 hours, and those who are required but fail to do that are guilty of a gross misdemeanor, which can carry a sentence of up to a year in prison and a $5,000 fine. So this is what priests would be they would be eligible for if this law is passed and they don't do their job, because they're more worried about being excommunicated. But we'll see if this does anything. 5 other Democrats are co-sponsoring this bill in Washington. And if it were to go into effect, it would go into effect at the end of July. We'll see where it goes. Hasn't worked yet in any state. These types of bills have been offered, but you just need one to get the ball rolling. So that's it there. What questions do we have? Child abusers are known for turning themselves in. Yeah, that's what the Catholic priest suggested, that if a priest just says, you turn yourself in, that's totally what they do. Like, if they were going to do that, why would they be going to see a priest first? Like, yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Oh, thank you for that donation, Olivia. Didn't we have a story about a Mormon pastor who was told not to report a father who was abusing his kid? Wouldn't that qualify as an example, they complained, saying didn't exist? That is a very good point. In fact, the thing you were talking about, where was that? I want to make sure I actually had that up here. In 2010, the story you're talking about, an Arizona guy named Paul Adams, he confessed to his bishop, his Mormon bishop, that he was sexually abusing his 5-year-old daughter. And the bishop was like, well, that sounds like a problem. I should report that. But in the Mormon church, they have like a toll-free hotline you're supposed to call to figure out what to do in sketchy situations. So he called the helpline and they said, oh, interesting. You know what you should do with that information? Nothing. And then the abuse just continued for years. And the dad's children eventually sued the Mormon church over this for knowing they could, for being able to step in, but not stepping in. And what happened with that case? The case was eventually tossed out by a judge. Why? Because according to Utah's laws, if you reveal something during an act of confession, it's allowed to stay a secret. So to your point, Olivia, yeah, this is one of those examples, to Bill Donahue of the Catholic League in the last story, of here's someone confessing to exactly this sort of thing, and they're pretending like it never happens. The church is ground zero for these kinds of crimes. They are a major part of the problem, and they should be held accountable in kind for their part in it. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm mad that other Catholic leaders aren't taking a bigger step in pushing for this sort of accountability. Like, every time there's police reform, you want cops, you wish more cops were on the front lines saying, yes, I want more accountability for my profession because that makes all of us better, instead of everyone saying, no, this is too much. We want more freedom. And if something bad happens, so be it. Like, it makes no sense at all. It's kind of a catch-22. If the priest doesn't report, people feel safe confessing. If he does report, they will no longer confess. I'll tell you what, if he does report and they no longer confess, I'm not bothered by that, because I don't really think these abusers are getting anything out of the confession. So if you're taking something away from the abuser, fine, because they're going to want to tell somebody. That's why they're going to confession, and I hope they tell someone who can do something about it. I'm really not worried that if the priest is required to report, then the bad guys are suddenly going to follow all the rules and avoid doing the thing that's going to incriminate them. That's why we have laws. And this is the common argument against laws. Like, well, if you have a law saying this is a bad thing, then, I mean, what's that? Like, if you take away, if guns are outlawed, only outlaws will have guns, or something like that. Same type of logic. Like, if you say the priest is going to report you, you seriously think abusers are going to be like, well, I guess I shouldn't do that thing? There are laws saying you can't abuse kids. They abuse kids anyway. So I don't think they really care what the rules are. So I'm not worried about that. Catch-22.